Great. I think we are live on Facebook. Okay. Okay.
There we go.
Looks like we're going.
We're up and running. That took a little bit of effort, but we figured it out.
Got there in the end.
And we're now streaming live on Facebook, which is very exciting. So I'm Nick Redding. I'm the president and CEO of Preservation Maryland. And I'm joined by Ellie Cowan, who is our director of government relations. And we're going to be talking about all things advocacy. We are at the halfway point in the Maryland General Assembly. Everybody's getting their halfway point emails out today. So you've probably been receiving them if you sign up to receive them from any legislators. And just for those who aren't familiar, Preservation Maryland is a statewide historic preservation organization. We've been in existence for 91 years. This is our 91st year. And we do a wide variety of different projects and programs. In addition to advocacy, we have a workforce development program in partnership with the National Park Service called the Campaign for Historic Trades. We have a historic property redevelopment program where we actually buy or engage with historic buildings and rehabilitate them for modern use. We have a funding program where we actually give out direct aid and direct grants to projects. And we also have a education and outreach program. We do webinars as we're, I guess, doing right now. And we also have a weekly podcast. So if you can't get enough of this right now, you can listen to us, tune in weekly at PreserveCast and check out all of that great information there. And then, of course, we also have a really robust advocacy program, which is mostly what we're going to be talking about today. And in addition to our statewide advocacy work, we also have a component called Smart Growth Maryland, where we focus in on local policy issues and how planning impacts how we grow, as well as how historic places are protected and the nature of our communities. But the real focus of today's conversation is going to be around our state advocacy. I'd say about 95% of our advocacy is proactive, and we retain the right at all times to be a little bit reactive if necessary. But our state advocacy really is the work that we do that's very proactive. Where we're trying to put policy, funding, and mechanisms in place that help us save more historic places. And that's where Ellie's work comes in. And we're going to hear a little bit about that. Maybe I'll turn it over to Ellie here just to kind of give people an idea who aren't familiar how the Maryland General Assembly works, how long session is, what the budget works like, and then we'll jump back in and we'll talk about our specific priorities this year, where we're at, and how individuals who care about historic places in Maryland can get engaged.
Great. Thanks so much for that intro, Nick. I think it's really important that you mentioned how we try to be proactive with our advocacy versus reactive. And we really look at our advocacy work as, instead of saving individual buildings through good policy and funding, we're really able to have an impact on preservation statewide, save thousands of buildings. And the scale of impact can be greater when we work at this statewide policy level. And so the Maryland General Assembly is the legislative branch of the state government, and they convene for 90 days every year for the legislative session. And so we are marking our midway through 45th day. I think we're actually on the other side now. It's the mad race to the end. So with only 90 days, that means we are constrained by time. And so there is definitely a crunch to move all of the legislation for the entire year within those 90 days. So the last 2 years have been very interesting because Last year was fully remote because of COVID-19 precautions. This year it's a hybrid with the Senate back in person, holding hearings in person, whereas the House chamber is still remote for their hearings. So it is keeps us advocates on our toes. And so every year, not only are there pieces of legislation that are moving, but the budget also needs to be passed. And so in Maryland, the governor sets the budget, and then the General Assembly is able to move money around and cut money, but not add money. Next year, that things will be changing. It'll be a different ballgame, but this year, that's still the way that things work. And for once, we are faced with a budget surplus, which is a great position to be in, but it also means that there's any number of interests trying to get funding, and we are one of those. And so if Nick, if we're ready to sort of jump in, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say too, as we're going through this, if anybody does have questions, you're welcome to post them in the chat, and we'll get to see them. And we're always happy to try and answer questions about how people can get engaged or specifics about projects or some of these pieces of legislation. So top on the list, we've been working on it for years, and we're poised to really make a big difference this year, is our state historic tax credit program. So let's talk a little bit about just briefly what it does and what we're trying to accomplish this year.
Great. So, right, our state historic tax credit is the historic preservation, community revitalization credit that we have in the state of Maryland. It is a 20% credit to help incentivize the reuse and rehabilitation of historic structures. And there's 3 programs of the historic tax credit, which is managed by the Maryland Historical Trust, the Preservation Governmental Agency. And so there is a residential credit. So that's for homeowners who want to make investments in their historic homes. There's a small commercial, which is focused on smaller Main Street scale, facade work, other those smaller buildings. And then there's the large commercial, which is competitively awarded and is for your much larger projects. So, mill rehabilitation, factories, things like along those lines that really have these huge catalytic effects due to their scale. And so the way that competitive commercial program is funded is that it is budgeted every year. So for the past 8 years, it had been budgeted at $9 million for the entire state. And just for a little regional context, West Virginia is doing about 30 million. Virginia, our neighbors to the south, doing about 100 million in their uncapped program. So Maryland is, to say we're falling behind is an understatement. So we have worked with many of you out there, many of our colleagues to try and increase that funding. And last year we were successful in increasing it. So for this year, it is budgeted at 12 million. And so we have legislation in that we've been working on that would double that funding in fiscal year 24. To 24 million, and then ramp it up to 36 million in fiscal year 27. And it's important to remember that we're always working on fiscal year budget ahead of the calendar year. The fiscal year for the state starts on July 1st. So right now we're considering the fiscal year 23 budget in our 22 legislative session. So our legislation, our main piece of legislation this year not only would fund that large commercial, it would also change the funding mechanism for our small commercial, which has been wildly successful. But because of that success, it has completely run out of funding now 2 times. Last year, we were able to pass some stopgap funding of $1 million for that. It was gone within 3.5 months. So there is a real need for this program. And so our legislation this year would annually fund that program at $4 million, which would be huge for the small developer community, for our Main Street communities as well. And so, we like to say not every community has, or district or area has, these large commercial projects, but I can guarantee most communities have these smaller historic buildings that could really benefit from the small commercial program. So we've had hearings for both of those in the Senate. And the Senate version is sponsored by Senator Cory McRae and Senator Katie Fry Hester. And in the House, where the bill is sponsored by House Majority Leader Delegate Eric Lutke and Delegate Stephanie Smith. And so right now we are waiting for that to move out of committee. We are cautiously optimistic, but that is something that we will be calling on our supporters to help us with as we get closer to the crossover date.
Maybe that's a good place to ask that question, is if people want to get engaged and they want to help, what can they do right at this moment? If they're listening in, they want to do something quick, what's the easiest thing to do?
The easiest thing to do is to contact your legislators. Send them a note and say that you're supportive of historic preservation and that you're supportive of this legislation. They keep track of phone calls and emails that they get. And so this historic tax credit legislation, which is Senate Bill 289 and House Bill 27, if you were to reach out to your legislators and say, I think that this is really good, I ask that you support that, that would be incredibly helpful.
So from historic tax credit and tax policy, we head now to the great outdoors, to Maryland's great outdoors, to a bill championed by Delegate Eric Lutke and Senator Sarah Elfreth. And what is it that this bill does and why are we supportive? So
this bill comes as the result of a state parks commission that was convened in 2021 to take a look at the state of state parks. After a huge, unprecedented uptick in usage of our state-owned lands, I think, I'm probably not the only person during COVID who really sought solace in the outdoors, and our state parks really hit a wall in terms of capacity, not only for the physical number of people that they could admit, but also the resources within it. So the infrastructure, things like that, had a huge strain put on them. And so this commission that was chaired by former Governor Paris Glendening took a expansive look at what the needs of our state park system was and came out with a number of recommendations. And this bill, the Maryland Great Outdoors Act, is the result of all of that work. And Nick, you testified, I think, a couple of times in front of that commission about preservation needs, because interestingly enough, Maryland State Parks and the Department of Natural Resources, on the larger scale, I believe they own more historic structures in the state of Maryland than any other entity. So this is not only a smart growth and environmental issue, this is absolutely a historic preservation issue. And in a survey of state park users from a couple of years ago, visiting historic resources was the #1 draw for visitors to Maryland state parks, tied with walking, and so I feel like that's not too shabby for parks visitors. So this is an investment that is wise for the state to be making. And this bill, in addition to a number of really wonderful funding and policy aspects to strengthen and make our parks more accessible and equitable, has a significant amount of funding for historic preservation of historic resources in the state parks, but also importantly, funding to conduct a survey of what's there and what needs to be done. We can't preserve things that we don't know are there, and if we don't know what the state they're in is. So we are very excited about this. It has been moving. It's had a very positive reaction in its committee hearings. Actually, today it's being voted on in the secondary committee on the Senate side. So we're hoping to see some movement there. And again, if this is something that you're interested in, you can visit presmd.org/advocacy, where we have all of our priorities and ways for you to get involved.
Yeah, and this one is critically important. It's been a long time coming, and I want to say what amazing work the Maryland Park Service and their colleagues in the Department of Natural Resources have done to this point, with somewhat limited resources. And so not only is this going to invest in historic places and buy more parkland and open more parks and make more parks accessible, but it's also going hopefully to increase ranger pay, get more rangers in the field, and make our public lands something that not only we can be really proud of, but will exist well into the future in a really good state. So we're excited about that and very appreciative of all the folks who are making this possible, and particularly the leadership of Senator Elfreth and Delegate Lukey and former Governor Glenn Denning. So it is time to move on to the third big priority. And then we've got a grab bag of other interesting things we've testified on. But we have this trifecta of great preservation policy out there. And another one that maybe people wouldn't think of as preservation per se, but is going to have a big impact if it passes, and that's Maryland Corps. So what is it? Why do we care? And what's it going to do?
So I believe it was actually last year or the year before that, the General Assembly established something called the Maryland Corps program. And some people may be familiar with the Corps model, which is a service-based model. Teach for America, Baltimore Corps has gotten a lot of news attention recently. And so this would be the state level of all of that. And what this bill does is the Maryland Corps revisions is that it really brings that Corps program into the 21st century. So it makes changes to allow for all different types of people to be involved by raising the pay, making it more livable, so that you don't have to have a secondary income or family support in order to do this. And it also invests in several different types of core programs, one of which is a state historic trades corps. And that's where we are interested specifically, and we're supportive of all the other core programs. But this is something that we have really been championing. We are involved in the National Historic Trades Corps, and we are hopeful that we'll be able to use that that's the model for the state version. And Nick, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, since you're our oh my goodness, excuse my cat.
It would not be a Facebook Live if we weren't visited by. Everyone wants to know, what's the cat's name? Just tell us.
That's Buck.
That's Buck.
Huge preservation fan.
Buck is a big preservation fan. Helped a lot with Maryland Corps, and so thank you, Buck.
Yes.
So yeah, I had the opportunity to testify on this, and we're obviously very supportive. This is a piece of legislation that, with particularly the Maryland Historic Trades Corps, it's basically a concept right now, but it's based on what's been done at the federal level. And this would empower this new quasi-state agency to really get engaged in that. So this has the potential to remake the look and feel of our historic trades industry by recruiting diverse applicants from all across the state, paying them livable wages, getting them geared up, and getting them either into state service, into union service, or into the private sector, whichever it might be. And sort of remains to be seen how it all come together, but it's a big first step to see that in writing, and to see historic trades identified and called out in state legislation is a priority. And it underscores just how valuable this work is that, as we've sort of reframed the work of Preservation Maryland, putting projects and programs at the heart of our work that really address some of the challenges confronting society. And the Maryland Corps not only does that through workforce development training, but it's also this whole idea of bridging partisan divides and getting people from different backgrounds
Right.
Engaged in public service. And so I know that that's very exciting to many people, and is really a truly nonpartisan issue, which is exciting. So that's where we're headed with Maryland Corps. We also figured we would mention a few others that Ellie has been testifying on, smart growth legislation, other things that people should be aware of. This is the grab bag of other things that we put in testimony on.
So every year we have our core priorities, but then I also am testifying on any number of bills, from historic preservation to energy bills, clean energy to smart growth, like Nick said. So we do have two other historic tax credit bills that I did want to mention that are tweaks to the residential program, so your homeowners historic tax credit, that are aiming to make it more accessible and more equitable. And so what those, there's two of them. One lowers the substantial rehabilitation threshold for households that have received the homeowners tax credit. And so that's a tax break for low income households. So by lowering the threshold, hopefully this would allow those types of households to access this credit. And then the second of those two bills increases the residential tax credit or restores it to a 25% credit. Right now it's 20. This would restore it to 25 because I think, as everybody knows, the cost of everything has gone up, including rehabilitation and construction materials. I believe lumber has gone up 73% in the last year, which is just wild. So by increasing that credit, it makes it more valuable and helps close the gap a little bit more for homeowners taking on these projects. And so in addition to those, we have also testified on the Maryland the Beautiful Act. Gotta love these names here. And that's another Delegate Lutke, Senator Elfreth joint there. And that is a land conservation bill. So it sets a robust land conservation goal for the state. So 30% by 2030 and 40% by 2040. So 30 by 30 and 40 by 40. And this is something that Preservation Maryland's interested in. We have been a member of the Partners for Open Space for years. And we really, know the value of open space to the health and well-being of Marylanders. So we're very supportive of this bill. And we are also working with our colleagues at the Citizens Campaign for the Environment on their priorities, which you have a comprehensive climate package that sets carbon emission goals. It was the Climate Solutions Now bill last year, and I believe it is called that again this year. And then also, interestingly, a constitutional amendment to add environmental rights as one of the inalienable rights of Marylanders to have a clean and healthy environment.
And it's a clean and healthy environment, but also calls out historic resources.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So a definite crossover between the two areas of interest, and would set up a situation in which Maryland citizens would have standing were their environmental or historic resources, the right to enjoy them be abridged.
Right. And then we are right now. So those are all bills that we're in support of, which is really, really great. And we're very enthusiastic about them. But we do have a couple that we are coming out with suggested amendments for, because we think that they could be better. One of which involves forest mitigation, and forests are one of the, when we're talking about climate change, resistant, taking steps to mitigate climate change, forests are one of our strongest fighters of climate change. And there's a bill that's come out this year that we think is a little misguided, that we believe threatens forest mitigation practices that we would like to see changed. And we're working with our colleagues at the Chesapeake Bay Foundation on that. So that's all legislation. We are working right now towards, you may have heard me mention crossover. So in the legislative process, you have the two chambers, and legislation moves through both of them. And when it moves through one chamber, it then crosses over into the other and has to go through that chamber too in order to get passed and then sent on to the governor to become law. And so there is, because we're working with only 90 days, there is a time limit on that. And so we are approaching crossover day, and that is March 21st. So there's not a lot of time. So for a bill to be successful, you need to get it through the process in at least one chamber to cross over. And so right now, I am, along with all of my other advocate colleagues, really pushing hard to get this process going. And our legislators are working tirelessly to do the same in marathon hearings and sessions. And they're really, really doing such great work. Can't speak highly enough of them. And we are also paying attention and commenting and testifying on the budget, which is a whole other process and isn't necessarily as exciting as, something called the Maryland the Beautiful Act, but it is just as important, if not, this is how all of these things get funded from legislative bond initiatives, or what used to be called bond bills, that support capital projects, preservation projects all across the state, to funding for the Maryland Historical Trust and the Department of Natural Resources, and program Open Space. So we have our eye on that, and we've submitted testimony for certain agency budgets, capital budgets, and things like that. So like I said, with the large budget surplus, there's a lot of money floating around, and I am working my hardest to make sure some of that comes to preservation, historic preservation, and smart growth initiatives.
So obviously you can tell we've got our work cut out for us. We're busy this year, and we're setting ourselves up for another grand slam for preservation, if possible, with some really big potential programs coming online and expansions of others. And it wouldn't be possible without long-term support. It's taken years for us to kind of build up our advocacy firepower in Annapolis, and the support of our donors makes all of that possible. So if anything today has inspired you to become a member of Preservation Maryland, you can jump on presmd.org, hit the donate button, and become a part of this movement. You can also drop to the bottom of our page, sign up for our e-newsletter, and get regular updates about what's happening in Annapolis. You can catch up with us here on social media. A very simple and free thing to do is to share this Facebook Live video, if you haven't already, to let your friends and colleagues know about the work of this organization and what we're doing to try and help benefit communities all across the state. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank Ellie and the entire advocacy team for the work that they're doing in Annapolis. And if anyone has any questions for us, you know where to reach us. You can jump and get online. You can always leave, if you find this video later, a comment in the comment section, and we will jump on and respond to it. But now is the time to get engaged. We got 20 days until crossover, and not all of those are even working days. So
Right.
It's a mad dash to the end, and we'll come back hopefully in April with some good news to share on a variety of different fronts. So thanks for everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much.